My lazy wife's father died, and she inherited his house and $33 million. She kicked me out saying, "Find somewhere else to live or die. I don't care, you're useless now." Days later, the lawyer laughed. "Did you even read the will?" My wife went pale. Hey Reddit, my wife inherited a fortune from her father, kicked me out like yesterday's trash, then found out she just handed me everything. The meltdown was spectacular. Here's how it went down. I'm Kyle, 34, been working construction management for the last 12 years. Started as a framer making $12 an hour, worked my way up to estimating and project coordination. Nothing glamorous, but honest work that pays the bills and doesn't require pretending to be someone I'm not. My wife Vanessa never worked a day in her adult life, and I mean that literally. When we met at a friend's barbecue 9 years ago, she was 23 and taking time to figure out what she wanted to do. That figuring out phase somehow stretched into a full-time career of doing absolutely nothing productive. She'd wake up around 11, spend 2 hours on her phone in bed, then migrate to the couch for reality TV marathons. Her daily exercise consisted of walking from the bedroom to the kitchen to complain that I hadn't bought the right brand of yogurt, the wrong brand being whatever brand I'd actually purchased. Every morning I'd leave for work at 6, she'd still be asleep. Every evening I'd come home at 6, she'd be exactly where I'd left her that morning. Same spot on the couch, same pajamas, same vacant expression, while watching strangers renovate houses or compete for roses. "How was your day?" I'd ask, already knowing the answer. Exhausting. I had so much to do. The so much included watching 4 hours of reality television, scrolling through social media for 3 more hours, and maybe, if she was feeling particularly ambitious, running the dishwasher I'd loaded the night before. Her father, Walter, made his fortune in commercial real estate development. Started with a single office building in the 80s, turned it into an empire worth north of 30 million by the time he hit 70. The man understood business, property values, and apparently his daughter better than anyone gave him credit for. Vanessa grew up in that mansion on Ridgemont Hill. The kind of place with a circular driveway, columns that served no structural purpose, and enough square footage to house a small village. Her childhood was private schools, summer camps in Switzerland, and the general belief that money appeared magically whenever she wanted something. Walter paid for our wedding, bought us a house, and covered Vanessa's credit card bills for the first 5 years of our marriage. I tried refusing his help multiple times, but he'd just wave me off saying family took care of family. Should have realized he meant I was family, not necessarily his daughter. The thing about marrying someone who's never had to work for anything is they don't understand what work actually means. I'd come home after 10 hours on a job site, covered in drywall dust, and she'd be irritated that I was late for dinner. Dinner being leftover takeout from yesterday that she'd reheated poorly. "You're always working," she'd complain. Like my job was some hobby I chose, over spending quality time watching her scroll through social media. "Someone has to pay the mortgage," I'd reply, even though technically Walter had paid off the mortgage as a wedding gift. "My dad pays for everything anyway. Why do you even bother?" That sentence right there summed up Vanessa's entire worldview. Work was pointless because daddy had money. Effort was unnecessary because someone else would handle it. Responsibility was something other people dealt with. I remember this one time, about 3 years into our marriage, when our water heater broke. Not a huge emergency, but we had no hot water and it needed replacing. I came home from work planning to call a plumber, and Vanessa was having a full meltdown. "We've been without hot water for 6 hours, she screamed. 6 hours! This is unacceptable. Did you call anyone to fix it? That's your job. I don't know how to do that stuff. You call a plumber. That's literally it. You call a plumber. Well, I didn't know which one to call. The woman had a smartphone in her hand for 12 hours a day, but couldn't figure out how to search for local plumbers. I ended up calling 3 companies, getting quotes, scheduling the replacement, and taking time off work the next day to be there for the install. Vanessa's contribution was complaining that the new water heater was ugly and asking why I couldn't have gotten one that matched our laundry room aesthetic. For 7 years, I played the role of devoted husband while she played the role of entitled princess waiting for her kingdom. Her friends were exactly like her. Women who'd never held jobs, living off family money, or their husbands' incomes. Spending their days at spin classes they complained about and brunches they Instagram storied. These women would come over for what Vanessa called wine afternoons, which meant 4 of them drinking 2 bottles of expensive stuff Walter had paid for while complaining about how hard their lives were. I'd come home to find them sprawled across my furniture, glasses everywhere, cheese plate demolished, discussing the exhausting challenge of choosing between 2 vacation destinations. "Kyle works in construction," Vanessa told her friend Brittany once, using the tone people reserve for discussing unfortunate medical conditions. "Oh," Brittany looked at me with pity. "That must be so hard on your body." "It's honest work," I replied. "Sure, but don't you want to do something more sophisticated?" Brittany's husband is in finance. Brittany's husband inherited his father's investment firm and had driven it into the ground twice before his family bailed him out. But sure, let's pretend sitting in an office gambling with other people's money is more sophisticated than building things that don't collapse. The only time Vanessa showed genuine enthusiasm was shopping. The woman could spend 4 hours comparing throw pillows and come home with 6 of them, each costing more than my weekly grocery budget. Our house looked like a furniture store showroom because she kept buying new stuff, getting bored, and buying more stuff. One month, I calculated she'd spent $7,000 on home decor, $7,000 on candles, vases, and decorative objects that served no purpose except filling space. When I mentioned this might be excessive, she looked at me like I'd suggested we live in a cave. It's called having taste, Kyle. Some of us care about our living environment. I care about our living environment. That's why I fix things when they break and maintain the property. That's different. That's just basic maintenance. I'm talking about creating a space that reflects who we are. Who we are, apparently, was people who needed 17 decorative throw pillows and 4 different scented candle collections. When I suggested maybe she could get a job or volunteer somewhere, she looked at me like I'd suggested she join a cult. Why would I do that? We don't need the money. It's not about money, it's about having purpose. My purpose is managing our household. Managing our household meant texting me shopping lists and occasionally running the dishwasher. Meanwhile, I was doing the actual household management, paying bills, scheduling repairs, handling anything that required follow-through or basic competence. About 2 years ago, Walter started getting sick. Nothing dramatic at first, just the usual stuff that happens when you hit 75. Slowing down, forgetting things occasionally, needing help with tasks that used to be simple. His doctor diagnosed early-stage dementia along with the normal aging issues. Arthritis making his hands shake, blood pressure problems, the gradual shutdown of a body that had worked hard for 7 decades. Vanessa's response was to avoid him. Too stressful, she said. Too depressing. She couldn't handle seeing him decline. So guess who started spending weekends at Walter's place, helping him sort through business papers and making sure he actually ate proper meals? The first time I showed up, Walter was trying to make breakfast and had burned his toast so badly the smoke alarm was going off. He was standing in the kitchen, confused about why the alarm wouldn't stop, holding a spatula like it might have answers. "Walter, you okay?" I asked, opening windows to clear the smoke. "Kyle, what are you doing here?" He looked embarrassed. "I was just making breakfast." "How about I make breakfast and you tell me what you want?" We fell into this routine. I'd show up Saturday mornings with fresh ingredients from the grocery store, actual food, not the frozen meals he'd been surviving on, and we'd cook together. Well, I'd cook while he supervised and told me stories. Walter and I developed this relationship where I'd show up Saturday mornings with breakfast sandwiches from this diner he loved, and we'd sit in his study going through files or just talking. He told me stories about building his business, about the mistakes he'd made, about his regrets regarding how he'd raised Vanessa. The study was where Walter felt most comfortable, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, organized by subject, a massive oak desk that had been his father's, leather chairs worn soft from decades of use. He'd sit in his usual spot and talk for hours about the deals he'd made, the properties he'd developed, the risks that had paid off, and the ones that hadn't. Started with one building, he told me one Saturday. 8 units, half of them empty, in a neighborhood everyone said was going nowhere. Paid $90,000 for it back in 1983. Everyone thought I was insane. What made you buy it? The neighborhood was going nowhere because nobody was investing in it. I figured someone had to be first. Renovated those units, rented them at fair prices to decent people, and within 2 years the whole block started improving. Sold it for $200,000 and bought 3 more buildings. He had this way of explaining business that made sense. Not the corporate jargon stuff you hear in office buildings, but practical wisdom about seeing potential where others saw problems. Gave her too much, he admitted once, talking about Vanessa. Thought I was being a good father, providing everything she needed. Turns out I was just teaching her that she'd never have to earn anything. She's still young, I offered, though I didn't believe it. Maybe she'll grow out of it. Walter gave me this look, sad and knowing. Kyle, she's 31 years old. If she hasn't figured it out by now, she's not going to. He wasn't wrong. These conversations became the highlight of my week. Walter treated me like an equal, asked my opinion on business decisions, actually listened when I talked about work projects. It was the kind of respect I'd never gotten from Vanessa or her social circle. When Walter's condition deteriorated last year, requiring round-the-clock care, I was the one coordinating with doctors, setting up the hospital bed in his home office, making sure his medications were organized properly. Vanessa visited maybe twice in 6 months, always with some excuse about being too emotional or too busy. Too busy doing what? Scrolling through furniture websites? The hospice nurse, this kind woman named Patricia, pulled me aside one day and said Walter kept asking for his daughter. I'd call Vanessa. She'd promised to visit, then find some reason why she couldn't make it. Eventually, Patricia stopped asking about her. "Your father-in-law is a good man," Patricia told me one afternoon while checking Walter's vitals. "Not many people take care of their in-laws like you do. He's been better to me than my own family," I replied honestly. "I can tell. He lights up when you walk in, asks about you all the time when you're not here." That hit me harder than expected. This man who barely knew me 8 years ago now considered me the closest thing to family he had left. Walter's final weeks were rough. The man who'd built an empire was reduced to struggling with basic tasks. His mind sharp, but his body failing. I'd sit with him for hours, sometimes reading the newspaper aloud, sometimes just keeping him company while he drifted in and out of sleep. The dementia got worse toward the end. Some days he'd think I was someone from his past, a business partner or old friend. Other days he was perfectly lucid, sharp as ever, talking about his plans for the estate and making sure his affairs were in order. One afternoon when he was having a good day, lucid and talkative, he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. "You're a good man, Kyle. Better than this family deserves." I laughed it off, just trying to help out. "No." His grip tightened. "You've been more of a son to me than anyone. I want you to know that." At the time, I thought he was being sentimental. Old man reflecting on his life, appreciating the people who'd shown up. I had no idea what he'd actually planned. Walter passed on a Tuesday morning in March. Patricia called me at work, said it had been peaceful. He'd gone in his sleep. I left the job site immediately, drove to the house, sat with him for a while even though he was already gone. The room was quiet except for the machines they disconnected. He looked peaceful, finally free from the body that had been failing him for months. I sat there thinking about all those Saturday mornings, all those conversations, all the lessons he'd taught me about business and life, and what actually mattered. Called Vanessa from Walter's study. Your dad died this morning. Silence for a beat then. Oh, okay. That's probably for the best. He was suffering. No tears, no emotion. Just clinical acknowledgement like I told her the cable bill was due. Are you coming over? I asked. What's the point? He's already dead. I hung up without responding. Spent another hour sitting with Walter before the funeral home came. Patricia showed up even though her shift had ended. Helped coordinate everything. Made sure the transition was handled with dignity. He was lucky to have you, she said, as they wheeled him out. Didn't feel lucky. Felt empty. The man had become more of a father to me than my own dad, who I talked to maybe twice a year, and now he was gone. The funeral was small. Some business associates, a few distant relatives, neighbors who'd known Walter for decades. Vanessa showed up in a designer black dress that probably cost more than the casket, checked her phone during the service, left immediately after without speaking to anyone. I gave the eulogy, because nobody else volunteered. Talked about Walter's business acumen, his generosity, his quiet wisdom. Mentioned how he'd built an empire through hard work and smart decisions, how he'd always had time for people who mattered. Didn't mention that his own daughter couldn't be bothered to visit him while he was dying. The will reading was scheduled for the following Thursday. Walter's attorney, Philip Brennan, had been handling his affairs for 30 years. Distinguished guy, probably pushing 70 himself, with the kind of calm authority that comes from dealing with wealthy people's drama for decades. We sat in his office, me, Vanessa, and her cousin Jennifer, who'd inherited Walter's collection of antique watches. The office had that old money smell, leather and wood polish, and expensive carpet trophy fish mounted on walls. Law degrees from schools I'd never be able to afford. Photos of Philip shaking hands with politicians and business leaders. Philip opened the will with standard legal language, then got to the bequests. Jennifer got the watches. Various charities got donations totaling over $2 million. And then the big one. To my daughter, Vanessa Hayes Morrison, I leave my entire estate, including the property at 4127 Ridgemont Hill. All financial accounts, investment portfolios, and business holdings, with a current estimated value of $33 million. Vanessa didn't react, just sat there with this smug expression like she'd known all along. Philip continued reading specific account numbers, property descriptions, investment details. The list went on for 10 minutes. Real estate holdings across 3 states, stock portfolios diversified across multiple sectors, business interests in companies I'd never heard of. The sheer scope of Walter's wealth was staggering. I'll admit I zoned out during the legal specifics. Numbers, account information, property deeds. My brain couldn't process the amount of money being discussed. 33 million. That number didn't feel real. After the reading, Vanessa signed papers while I waited awkwardly, unsure if I was supposed to be there. Philip handed her a folder thick with documents, shook her hand, and told her to call if she had questions. In the car, Vanessa was already on her phone, texting her friends. 33 million, she said, not looking up. I mean, I knew Dad was wealthy, but this is insane. It's a lot of responsibility, I offered. She laughed. Responsibility? I'm hiring people for that. I'm going to travel, buy whatever I want, actually live my life. Garrett, what about your dad's legacy? The foundation work he wanted to do? Kyle, he's dead. He doesn't care anymore. This money is mine now, and I'm going to enjoy it. That night, she ordered the most expensive takeout she could find. Some Japanese place that charged $40 per roll, opened a bottle of champagne that Walter had been saving for something special, and toasted to her financial freedom. I sat across from her, eating overpriced sushi that tasted like regular sushi, watching her celebrate her father's death like she'd won the lottery. Which, I guess from her perspective, she had. We should probably meet with a financial advisor, I suggested. Make sure we're managing this properly. She rolled her eyes. We? Kyle, this is my inheritance. Right, but we're married. It affects both of us. It affects me. You're just along for the ride. The next few days were surreal. Vanessa started shopping like she was trying to single-handedly stimulate the economy. New car, a Range Rover that cost more than I'd made in 2 years. New furniture, she hired some designer who charged $10,000 just for the consultation. New wardrobe, I watched her credit card statement climb past $20,000 in clothing purchases. She hired an interior designer to redo the entire house we lived in. Then decided she'd rather just move into Walter's mansion instead. Fired the designer, lost the deposit. Didn't care because what was $15,000 when you had 33 million? We're moving to Ridgemont? I asked. I'm moving. You can come if you want. That sentence should have been my warning sign. But I was still processing everything. Walter's death, the inheritance, Vanessa's sudden shift into full-blown narcissism mode. Her friends started treating her differently. Suddenly she was the center of every social gathering, the one everyone deferred to, the person whose opinion mattered most. Money does that. Changes how people see you, even when you haven't changed at all. Brittany, who used to subtly look down on Vanessa for not having her own wealth, was now asking for investment advice from a woman who'd never balanced a checkbook in her life. By the following Monday, she'd already moved most of her stuff to the mansion. I was still at our house, finishing up a project deadline, planning to move my things that weekend. Wednesday night, I came home from work to find all my belongings in garbage bags on the front porch. Clothes, toiletries, my laptop, random items from my desk. Everything just dumped into black trash bags, like I was being evicted. There were 8 bags total. 8 garbage bags representing 7 years of marriage and 34 years of life. My work boots sticking out of one bag, dress shirts crumpled in another, family photos mixed with bathroom supplies in a third. I called her. What's going on? Why is my stuff outside? Oh, right. I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Her voice was casual, like we were discussing dinner plans. I'm moving on, Kyle. I don't need you anymore. What do you mean you don't need me? I have money now. Real money. I don't need you to pretend to provide or whatever you thought you were doing. So you should probably find somewhere else to live. The words didn't register at first. 7 years of marriage. And she was kicking me out over the phone like I was a roommate she'd found on Craigslist. Vanessa, we're married. Yeah, and we can deal with that later. Right now, I just need you gone. You're kind of killing my vibe. Killing her vibe. My existence was interfering with her vibes. So what? I'm just supposed to leave? That's generally how this works. Find somewhere else to live. Or die. I honestly don't care which. She hung up. I stood on my own porch, staring at garbage bags full of my life, trying to understand what had just happened. My wife had inherited $33 million and decided I was disposable. Not worth keeping around. Not worth basic courtesy. Just immediately discarded like I'd never mattered at all. Had to laugh at the absurdity. Not a happy laugh. More like the kind of laugh you do when reality becomes so ridiculous, your brain short circuits. Loaded the bags into my truck, drove around aimlessly for an hour, ended up at the Starlight Motel on Route 9. $45 a night, flickering neon sign where half the letters were burned out. Vending machines that only accepted exact change. The room smelled like industrial cleaner trying unsuccessfully to mask decades of questionable decisions. The bed had one of those thin bedspreads that's been washed so many times it's basically transparent. Wood paneling on the walls, water stains on the ceiling tiles, a bathroom the size of a closet with a shower that probably violated health codes. Sat on the bed with its thin comforter and questionable stains, staring at wood-paneled walls, thinking about how quickly everything had collapsed. This morning, I'd had a wife and a home. Tonight, I was living in a motel room that made prison cells look inviting. Vanessa texted around midnight, BTW, I'm keeping the house. You can have your truck and whatever's in those bags. Consider it your settlement. My settlement. 7 years of marriage, and I was getting garbage bags and a 12-year-old truck with 140,000 miles on it. Spent the next few days in a fog, going through the motions at work, coming back to the motel, eating gas station sandwiches because I couldn't afford restaurants, trying to figure out what came next. Called a divorce attorney Friday afternoon, scheduled a consultation for the following week. That's when something Walter had said started bothering me. We'd been watching this old war movie about 6 months before he died. Something with submarines and tense strategic decisions. During a commercial break, Walter had turned to me. You're a good man, Kyle. Better than this family deserves. At the time, I'd assumed he meant I was treating Vanessa well despite her obvious flaws, or that I was helping him when his daughter couldn't be bothered. But the way he'd said it, the emphasis on this family, made me think there was something more. Walter was meticulous. The man had color-coded filing systems, organized his garage by tool type and size, planned everything down to which socks he'd wear on which days of the week. He wasn't the kind of person who'd leave $33 million to someone without considering all possible outcomes. So why would he leave everything to a daughter who'd ignored him, who'd never worked, who'd spent her entire life demonstrating zero responsibility or competence? The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Sunday morning, I called Philip's office, got his voicemail, left a message explaining who I was, and that I had questions about Walter's estate. He called back within an hour. Kyle Morrison? His voice sounded surprised. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for over a week. Trying to reach me? Why? Because you need to be involved in the estate settlement. Your wife said you'd moved out of state and wanted no contact regarding the inheritance. The pieces started clicking together. She told you I'd moved? She said you'd relocated for work and weren't interested in the estate proceedings. I found it odd given how close you were with Walter, but she was quite insistent. Philip, I'm living in a motel on Route 9. I haven't gone anywhere. Long pause. I think you'd better come to my office. There's something you need to see. Monday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years, put on my least wrinkled shirt, drove to Philip's office downtown. He was waiting with that thick folder from the will reading, plus another envelope I hadn't seen before. Kyle! He shook my hand firmly. I'm going to be direct with you. Your wife has been lying to me, and I suspect she's been lying to you too. He slid a document across his desk. It was Walter's will, but different from the version I'd heard at the reading. This is the complete will. What I read last week was the first section, the standard bequests. There's a second section that only gets revealed under certain circumstances. My name was highlighted in yellow on page 4. Philip adjusted his glasses and read aloud. The bequest to my daughter, Vanessa Hayes Morrison, of my entire estate, is conditional upon her treatment of her husband, Kyle Morrison, following my death. Should she fail to treat him with respect, dignity, and consideration befitting a spouse, her inheritance shall be immediately revoked and transferred in its entirety to Mr. Morrison. I stared at the words, reading them over and over, trying to make my brain accept what they meant. I don't understand. Why would he do this? Philip leaned back in his chair. Walter came to see me about 8 months before he died. Said he'd been watching how Vanessa treated you, how she took you for granted, how she showed no appreciation for your care and dedication. He was worried that once he was gone, she'd discard you. He was right about that. He was right about a lot of things. Walter told me, and I quote, "My daughter is arrogant enough to hang herself with her own rope. I'm just making sure the rope is clearly labeled." The condition had a 30-day window. If Vanessa treated me with basic decency for 30 days after inheriting, the money was hers. If she didn't, everything reverted to me. She kicked me out after 9 days, I said quietly. Which means legally, the condition has been triggered by her own actions. Vanessa has forfeited her inheritance. The room felt like it was spinning. $33 million. A mansion. Investment portfolios. All of it because my wife couldn't pretend to be a decent human being for 1 month. What happens now? I asked. Philip started pulling out documents. Now we transfer everything to you. The house, the accounts, the business holdings, all of it. Can she fight this? She can try, but the will is extremely clear. And Walter made sure it was airtight. He even included documentation. He kept a journal of her behavior toward you. Recorded phone calls where she dismissed you. Text messages where she belittled your work. He built a case proving she didn't respect you. Walter had been gathering evidence for months, documenting every instance of Vanessa's cruelty and indifference, creating an undeniable record that she failed the basic condition of treating me like a human being. We spent 3 hours going through paperwork. Philip had already started the process after trying to reach me for a week, so most of the legal work was done. Just needed my signatures, my banking information, my agreement to accept the inheritance. One more thing, Philip said, pulling out a sealed envelope. Walter left this for you. Inside was a handwritten letter on Walter's personal stationery. Kyle, if you're reading this, it means Vanessa showed her true colors. I'm sorry you had to experience that, but I'm glad you'll be taken care of. You were more of a son to me than I deserved. Use this money wisely, live well, and don't feel guilty about any of it. She made her choice. This is your reward for being a decent human being when you had every reason not to be. The world needs more people like you, and fewer people like what I accidentally raised. Take care of yourself, Walter. I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, tried not to get emotional in the lawyer's office. By late afternoon, the paperwork was signed. Philip made some calls. Within hours, every account Walter had owned was frozen, and being transferred to my name, Vanessa's credit cards stopped working. Her access to the mansion's accounts disappeared. Everything she thought was hers suddenly wasn't. Drove to a regular motel, not the Starlight. Somewhere with clean sheets and water pressure that didn't feel like someone spitting on you from above. Sat on the bed, stared at my phone, tried to process that I'd gone from being homeless to being worth $33 million in one afternoon. Around 9 p.m., my phone started blowing up. Vanessa, of course. What did you do? My cards aren't working. The bank says my accounts are frozen. Answer me right now. Then voice messages, her voice getting progressively more panicked. Kyle, this isn't funny. Call me back. Something's wrong with the accounts. Did you do something? I swear if you're behind this, I'll destroy you. Ignored every message. Let her panic. Let her experience the same confusion and helplessness she'd put me through when she dumped my belongings on the porch. The next morning, drove to Ridgemont Hill. Philip had already sent notice that I was the legal owner, and security had been informed. The gate code worked when I punched it in, the massive iron gates swinging open like they were welcoming me home. The circular driveway looked exactly like I remembered from all those weekends helping Walter. The fountain still running, water cascading down 3 tiers of carved stone. The landscaping immaculate. Someone was still maintaining it, probably on autopilot contracts that Walter had set up years ago. Vanessa was on the front steps, phone pressed to her ear, screaming at someone. I don't care what your system says. I have millions. Check again. Hello? Parked right in front, stepped out of my truck that suddenly looked very out of place among all this wealth. She turned, saw me, froze mid-sentence. Kyle? What are you doing here? Coming home. She blinked rapidly, brain trying to process. What do you mean coming home? This is my house. Pulled out the folder Philip had given me, the new deed with my name on it, handed it to her. She scanned the first page, confusion turning to concern. Flipped to the second, concern turning to fear. Started reading faster, hands beginning to shake. Color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. By the time she reached the condition clause, her legs were wobbling. This is fake, she whispered. Call Philip if you want. He'll confirm everything. You're lying. You're trying to steal my inheritance. Held up the keys Philip had given me. Heavy brass keys on a ring with Walter's initials. These are real. The transfer is real. You kicked me out 9 days after inheriting that violated the condition. Everything reverts to me. She sank onto the steps, the folder slipping from her hands, papers scattering across expensive marble like white leaves in wind. No, this can't be happening. Dad wouldn't do this to me. He did exactly this to you. He knew exactly who you were. She looked up, mascara starting to run, even though she hadn't been crying. Just the shock making her eyes water. I'm his daughter. I'm supposed to inherit. You were supposed to inherit if you treated me with basic human decency for 30 days. You couldn't make it 9. This isn't fair. The irony was perfect. The woman who told me to find somewhere else to die was now claiming life wasn't fair. You could have had everything, Vanessa. All you had to do was not be cruel for 1 month. Walter gave you every opportunity to be a decent person. She started scrolling through her phone frantically. I'm calling my lawyer. This is wrong. He can't just change his will like this. He didn't change his will. This was always the will. You just never bothered to read past the first section. Vanessa tried standing, wobbled, sat back down, watched her face as reality set in. The mansion belonged to me. The accounts belonged to me. The money, the investments, the business holdings, all of it, because she'd told me to find somewhere else to die. What am I supposed to do? She asked, voice small for the first time in years. I don't know. Get a job maybe? Find somewhere else to live? Recognition flashed in her eyes. You're quoting me. You told me to find somewhere else to live or die. So yeah, I'm quoting you. Consider it returned wisdom. She started crying for real then. Not grief crying or remorse crying. Angry crying. The kind of tears that come when someone who's never faced consequences suddenly has to face all of them at once. I'm your wife. You can't just take everything. I'm not taking anything. Your father gave it to me. You throwing me out just made it official. Stood there watching her fall apart on the steps of a mansion that used to be hers, feeling absolutely nothing. No satisfaction, no revenge, no victory. Just emptiness where 7 years of marriage used to be. I'll fight this, she said between sobs. I'll sue you. I'll prove he wasn't mentally competent when he wrote this. He wrote it 8 months before he died. Medical records show he was completely sound. He recorded everything, Vanessa. Every mean comment, every dismissive text, every time you couldn't be bothered to visit him. He built a case proving you failed the condition. She looked up, understanding finally clicking. He was testing me? He was giving you a chance. You failed. Left her there on the steps. Walked into the mansion like I owned it. Because I did. The place was exactly how Walter had kept it. Vanessa hadn't changed anything yet. Probably too busy shopping to bother with actual decisions. His study still had his books organized by subject. Business on the left, history in the middle, biographies on the right. His desk was clear except for a photo of him and his late wife on their wedding day. Sat in his leather chair, looked around at $33 million worth of life, tried to figure out what came next. Philip called that afternoon. I heard from Vanessa's attorney. They're requesting a meeting to discuss settlement options. She has nothing to settle with. I know. But they're going to try. Just want you prepared. The meeting happened 2 days later at Philip's office. Vanessa showed up with some attorneys she'd scraped together. Probably the first one who'd take her call without a retainer. Young guy, maybe 30, wearing a suit that was trying too hard. The kind of lawyer who advertises on bus benches. Her lawyer was clearly out of his depth. Started with aggressive posturing about undue influence and questionable testamentary capacity. Terms he'd probably just learned last night. Philip let him talk for 5 minutes, then slid a folder across the table. This is Walter Hayes' medical evaluation from 2 weeks before he modified his will. Completely sound. This is the journal he kept documenting his daughter's treatment of her husband. This is testimony from the hospice nurse about who actually visited during his final months. This is what? Okay, we get it, the young lawyer interrupted. Do you? Because your client seems to think she has a case when she actually has nothing. We sat there in uncomfortable silence. Vanessa wouldn't look at me. Just stared at the table, probably realizing her $33 million fantasy had evaporated like morning dew on hot pavement. What if we negotiate? Her lawyer tried. Split the estate 50-50? Philip didn't even dignify that with a response. Just stared until the lawyer squirmed in his cheap suit. Okay, what if your client violated a clearly stated condition, Philip said. The will is explicit. Her options are accept the outcome or waste money on a lawsuit she'll lose. Vanessa finally spoke. What about the house? Can I at least have the house we lived in together? The house Walter had bought us, paid off, and put in his name to avoid tax complications. That house. That property is part of the estate, Philip explained patiently. It belongs to Kyle now. So I get nothing? You get exactly what you told him to have, nothing. The meeting ended without resolution, because there was nothing to resolve. Vanessa had gambled her entire inheritance on me being too weak or too dependent to challenge her. She'd lost spectacularly. Filed for divorce the following week, Vanessa tried claiming she deserved spousal support, but Colorado is an equitable distribution state. Since the inheritance wasn't marital property, and she'd voluntarily ended the marriage by kicking me out, she had no claim to anything. The divorce took 6 months to finalize. 6 months of Vanessa fighting over every detail, trying to prove she deserved something, anything, from the wreckage of her own choices. Her lawyers kept trying different angles. Emotional distress, wrongful termination of marital benefits, claims that I'd manipulated Walter. All of it went nowhere because the evidence was overwhelming. Walter's journal had hundreds of entries documenting Vanessa's behavior. Phone recordings of her dismissing me. Text messages where she called me useless. Testimony from Patricia, the hospice nurse. Statements from neighbors who'd watched me care for Walter while Vanessa partied with her friends. She ended up moving in with her cousin Jennifer, the one who'd inherited the watch collection. Last I heard, she was working retail at a department store in the mall, dealing with the kind of customers who'd probably treated her like garbage when she was on the other side of the counter. The karmic justice was almost too perfect. Vanessa still sends messages occasionally, usually around holidays or when she needs money. Always some variation of, that inheritance should have been mine, or, you stole my father's legacy. Never respond. Nothing left to say to someone who thought love came with conditions, but inheritance didn't. Walter understood something most people don't. You can't teach humility by giving someone everything. You teach it by showing them exactly what they had and making them watch it disappear because of their own choices. He gave Vanessa $33 million. She chose cruelty over decency and lost everything. Meanwhile, I'm living in a mansion I never wanted, managing money I never expected, running a foundation honoring a man who was more of a father to me than my own. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.